And what are your thoughts on? I mean, obviously, it's not only about Amazon, but people use Amazon because we're growing more and more into a, I don't say, yeah, lazy society. A lot of us are on our phones rather than talking to people. So, what is the role of people? Because I think people that live in New York City, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Chicago's downtown area, San Francisco's area, they're kind of removed from the wealth gains and the development that has happened from the other side where people are homeless, people are being forced pretty much, like you said, out of where they lived into the suburbs or even out of state. Do you think there's kind of this growing cognitive disconnect between the wealthier and these higher salaried people that shouldn't be scorned? I mean, they work hard too, but the effects of the people that are being displaced.
Yeah, I don't think it's just shared by the very wealthy or the people who are affluent or even maybe the top 20% of people. I think that you find this cognitive dissonance right now is if you just go down and walk around downtown Seattle and you will see homeless people, and people have learned just to walk past them. And that's a pretty disgraceful statement for our city.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring in, I have friends from Finland who have come here, and it's like they're just aghast that we could have such a wealthy city, and yet it seems like the wealth has enabled the homelessness crisis and this huge gap in wealth and income.
So,
and so you sort of just, and everyone does it. You just walk by, and as a homeless person, you just walk by.
Now, obviously, you guys work on the policy side. It's not only Seattle. I mean, San Francisco is kind of a different city than it used to be. A lot. I mean, everywhere we go is kind of gentrified. You see the state or the city putting lots of money into like a 10, 15 block radius. Chicago comes to mind. It's beautiful downtown, the riverside, and the rest has been left to rot. So what do people do? Because you're starting to hear it more. I mean, at least one candidate's talking about gentrification, but what do people do on the grassroots level that aren't policymakers or think tanks, because it's affecting everybody? And the trickle down is like, all right, well, you have to move out to the suburbs, but what happens when the prices go up there?
So I think that the city needs to be much more aggressive in building housing, and I think we need to tax the developers or insist that that part of their housing, a much larger percent of their housing, goes to working class and low-income families.
Isn't that a problem when the politicians are taking money from the developers?
It is sometimes a problem. It depends who the politician is. I think that we have a lot to learn in terms of what we could do as a city to mitigate the homelessness and actually create housing that will mitigate that homelessness. Of course, all this is sort of bundled up into the stagnation of income for middle-class families. And this is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on gradually. Our sort of social contract has been taken apart for the past 40 years, little by little. And but I think that we sort of hit a tipping point after 2010 in terms of public services being really hurt because we didn't have the revenue flows coming in, and then private incomes and wages and benefits being really hurt because corporations had more power and took that money. So a good example is, we talked about this, Boeing is obviously a very wealthy company, and they were actually a much better sort of corporate citizen in our state. I can remember them in 1985 talking about how subsidizing housing for their workers in Everett because they need to recruit more workers and they need to subsidize the housing. Well, now they have about a $9 billion tax giveaway from the state of Washington. They forced their workers to go from a defined benefit pension, and so that's a big long-term transfer of income from workers to the corporation.
But that's what I'm not getting. So if you have no income tax and then you're losing an additional $9 billion in revenue, how the hell do you pay for anything?
Well, we don't. We have an ongoing fiscal crisis.
Yeah.
Right now, we have an ongoing fiscal crisis. We're not going to be able to keep up with what are the legitimate public demands for high quality K-12 education. For our tuition rates have zoomed up, and that's just because the state has disinvested in higher education. That needs to be corrected. We have pathetic, miserable funding for early childhood education, and so the answer is we don't keep up. We reduce public services. We continue the stagnation of income for workers. We have a system of social benefits that are sort of designed to target very low income people, so you hit these income cliffs, and it makes it very difficult for lower income, working class people, middle class people to make sure they have adequate health care, or make sure that they have adequate adequate income so their kids can go to community college or to four-year university. So we're in a bad situation.
And let me ask you, as somebody who's seen the effects of Amazon here, the good and the bad, what were your thoughts seeing essentially, governors all over this country, plutocrats all over this country, kind of twisting themselves into human pretzels? It was like an auction of people's souls to get Jeff Bezos, and then to come there. And we saw New York backed out, and then Governor Cuomo. It was like the boyfriend, in the doghouse with the girlfriend going outside the window, and it seems really a different set of priorities for these governments, for Amazon, rather than working people.
Yeah. So I think that one thing that we didn't say is that the city of Seattle has invested a lot of our infrastructure, particularly in this area, probably over 150, 180 million, just to absorb the growth that Amazon has created in terms of sewer and transportation, and so that's important to know that the city has actually made a huge investment to enable Amazon to be here and to prosper here. And that wasn't done through, I don't think it was done, it was just sort of it wasn't done through a deal with Amazon. It was done through the fact that we have all this growth, and so the city had to invest in the infrastructure. What's interesting about New York City is that Amazon had this ludicrous contest, which a lot of different cities and municipalities participated in. But very quietly, Google moved some development to New York City, and I think Microsoft. There's a number of, I think Google and Tableau and Facebook all launched efforts in New York City, and they didn't go through this whole process. They just put their sites there. So Amazon seems particularly selfish and grabby in terms of this work. And that's unfortunate, but it's to be expected. If a corporation sees that they can increase their bottom line by avoiding taxes or getting rebates, they're going to do that. Boeing, when the legislature passed this first Boeing giveaway in 2002. Which was about $4 or $5 billion, and the deal was to construct the 787 in the state of Washington. Well, a year or two later, the CEO of Boeing said, "Well, we were gonna build here anyway, so this is just like because we have the most talented aerospace workforce in the world right here. So we just ended up, giving them a whole bunch of money, which we didn't need to. So that's sort of a, that's where they have the upper hand, and they can always threaten, like, we're going to leave or we're going to reduce jobs. And in fact, Boeing has left and reduced jobs after getting these huge tax breaks. In fact, job reduction is from 2013. I think there's an uptick this year, but from 2013 to 2017, I think it reduced jobs by about 30,000 jobs in the state of Washington.
But then it gets down to the psychology. I mean, beyond Washington and Seattle, it seems that the governments, their mentality is, we can find the money for big business because they're going to bring in these high-paying jobs and we're going to have lavish development downtown and all this, but we can't find the money for affordable housing, K through 12, and all the things you talked about.
Yeah, they're making the wrong choices. That's definitely, it's unfortunate. It's definitely the case, and it's baked into a lot of the tax codes. Just yesterday, I was in Olympia because right now, precious metal dealers, people who deal in gold bullion and pennies like the 1919 Lincoln penny, they pay no sales tax or business and occupation tax for any of their operations in the state of Washington. And that's just because there was a legislator in the 1980s who was a precious metals dealer and wanted to get out of that payment. And so it's interesting if you are in Olympia and you go to a dealer, and I saw this advertised yesterday, for $5,000 you can get a 1919 Lincoln penny, and you can buy that, and you pay no sales tax on it, and the business pays no business tax on it. But if you go across the street to Macy's and buy an undershirt, then you pay a 10% sales tax, and the business pays a B&O tax. So it shows you that we have such a regressive tax system that favors the already privileged and wealthy significantly, and overly taxes the working class people.
And long term, what do you see as the effects if this keeps going this way, as far as tax giveaways? I know the city also did a lot for Amazon as far as regulation too, because it seems to me it's a quiet crisis, but I mean, when you're talking 4,000 children on the streets, 35% of the homeless, I believe, have some type of college education or a college degree.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of backwards. At the same time, you have a president who, in addition to his insane tweeting, is talking about a booming economy.
Yeah.
Well, who's it booming for?
Yeah. Well, it's not booming for regular working people. We know that. It's a good question long term, what's going to happen. I wouldn't want to forecast it. Because if you had gone to sleep in 1980, where, for example, college tuition here was $1,500 a year for the entire year, where health care was probably $50 a month or something like that at the most, where child care costs were about half of what they are now, where companies had defined benefit pensions, and where wages had kept up with inflation and increases in productivity over time. And if you had gone to sleep then and woken up now, then there would be a revolution, because there's such a huge change. But because it's been done so incrementally and quietly over time, people have gotten used to it. Mm-hmm. Young people think of course they're going to end up with tens of thousands of dollars of student debt. That's just the way of the world, right? So if we can continue this disintegration of the social contract and this sort of incremental basis, I don't know if people are going to wake up or not. Mm-hmm. But if we can turn it around, and if we can start taking back a lot of these areas and making them really truly building a commonwealth, then that's also a possibility, right? So one of the things about paid family medical leave that's really interesting is that this is something that where our parents might have had defined benefit pensions and affordable health care, they didn't have paid family medical leave. But now we will have paid family medical leave. So it's sort of a question of how we build back up, how we turn the tide. And I don't really have an answer about what are the political trends that that we can either capitalize on or help to catalyze in terms of that process.
When you look nationally, we know what Bernie stands for. He obviously, Medicare for all, he's not in the middle on these things. He's not talking about, guaranteed jobs. You have people like Kamala Harris throwing around tax credits. Even Andrew Yang is talking about universal basic income. So there's a lot of different ideas out there. But as far as I could see, I'm not asking for your endorsement, but Bernie's kind of talking about the systemic problems with the system. You could do short-term things like tax credits and things like that, but if you don't change kind of this corporate welfare, what we're talking about is basically corporate welfare.
There are a number of voices coming out of the presidential contest that'll be addressing, I think, a lot of those issues. And I'm not going to. In fact, I'm not, favoring anyone right now. I just am hoping that. I will say one thing is that what Bernie did in 2016 has been followed up in pushing the conversation to the left and to more progressive ideas for policy, which is really beneficial for all of us.
Last question. What's the role of the media? Because honestly, wherever I go, the national media is not doing deep dives on Seattle homelessness, but the local media in general, in Chicago, you see the local media kind of report the death count like a sports score. I don't know how the local media is here, but
the local media here actually pays a lot of attention to homelessness.
Okay.
They have the Seattle Times has 3 or 4 people, I think, on their homelessness bureau. So they're taking it very seriously. They haven't come up with any solutions, but
right.
They're taking it very seriously, which is good. So it is something that is.
Is there any media questioning of corporate power in Seattle and Washington
Well, of
State?
course not in the editorial pages.
Right.
Absolutely not. But the reporting on homelessness is really good in terms of the definition of the problem and not hiding it, but in some ways highlighting it, which is really important.
And what would be your advice to other people in other cities and states that are experiencing kind of gentrification? Because a lot of people we meet are living paycheck to paycheck, scared if they're going to be able to afford their rent, or being kind of pushed out of where they live. What should people do? Kind of activism, lobby their city council?
I think people need to realize that there are some elements of social democracy that we all need, whether it's healthcare or education or early childhood education or paid family medical leave or higher education or a decent pension. And so there's a number of organizations and cities have made steps in those directions, and we need to sort of consolidate those and move forward. I don't think we're going to get a lot of progress at the federal level. But I do think that we can make progress at the state and the local level. And we have made some progress in our state. Even with this regressive tax system, we've gotten things through like paid family medical leave and a minimum wage increase. And I think we can continue to do that stuff if we have, if people don't turn away from politics, but embrace it, get engaged with it, and then don't get co-opted by it. I've seen a lot of sort of students like in the universities are co-opted by the whole idea that, oh, well, I can get a seat at the table. But we don't want a seat at the table. We want people marching in the streets and demanding a lower tuition and taxation of corporations.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statusquo.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statusquo.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.